Welcome back to the Onyx Report's Black Masculinist News Feed. This is Dr. T. Hasan Johnson, and we are going to cover, an interesting piece I thought you guys might enjoy. All right. Let's see here. All right, and this one you can find in the New York Times. I believe they call it in their social cues section, right? And it's entitled, "I was fine with being the breadwinner until 2020 came along." Right? It says, now this is an advice column kind of section of the paper, right? So it says, the person writing in says, "My husband pays for nothing, and I'm starting to resent him. I was remarried 2 years ago to a caring and considerate man. He moved into my home with my 2 kids, who are now away at college. When he arrived, he suddenly let me know that he didn't expect to pay any household expenses. I work part-time and have some family money, but I'm still on a budget. I didn't mind paying for everything until the pandemic hit. Now I've lost my job and my investments have taken a hit, so my finances are tight. Right? I brought up my situation several times, but my husband says things are tight for him too. Our incomes are about the same. I can't help feeling hurt and resentful. He knows this, but he does nothing. Any advice?" And so the advice columnist responds. It says, "Wife, I'm confused. Unless you left out a crucial detail, your husband does all the cooking and cleaning, for instance, or performs most of the emotional labor in your relationship. The man you described as caring and considerate sounds like a real freeloader. It's time for you to take it up a notch. When we live with other people, much less marry them, there's no room for subtlety about household expenses. The bills must be paid. It doesn't sound as if you've made a direct request of your husband, though. Stop hinting and tell him what you think a fair division of expenses would be. Then listen to his response." Right? Now I can understand if he's reluctant to divide all the bills in half. You set up an infrastructure for 2 kids. He's not responsible for them. There's no good argument for his paying nothing toward housing, food, and maintenance costs. An honest conversation should stop this gravy train, or at least reveal what your husband is thinking. You'll never solve this problem without knowing that. Now, this is interesting to me. The reason I did this one, is because at the end of the day, we hear a lot about the wrongs and ills and problems with the very idea of patriarchy, even though there are many people that still rely on patriarchal notions for their daily survival, as a matter of fact, right? And don't have a problem with accepting it, while at the same time trashing this idea of a structure where men provide for everyone else. So in looking at this article, what I was taken with was this title. For first and foremost, I was fine with being a breadwinner until 2020 came along. You wanted that crown, you wanted that hat, and as soon as it got uncomfortable, you wanted to change the terms. So here, for many men, over the however long we want to look back, taking in a wife and being responsible for her, hell, even a girlfriend, was considered par for the course. I mean, even during the dating phase, you being primarily financially responsible as a man is still an accepted trope. Nobody has a problem with it. Too few men seem to have a problem with it, for that matter. I've rarely heard of women having a problem with it when it benefits them, right? But in this particular piece, we're assuming that this is a wife, and the response person calls it that. The wife has a problem with being the financial breadwinner, and the advice columnist helps to shame and condemn the husband and opt for the wife by suggesting that she pressure him for, if nothing else, more about what he's thinking and more about what he should do to help the household. But he's actually told her, he's let her know these are his standards, these are his parameters. So think about it the opposite way. Right? If this was a person writing in, if this was a man said, "I had a woman move in, we got married, had 2 kids, my 2 kids moved out, I've been financially responsible for everything, COVID hit, things are getting tight, my wife's income is not available to me, and I have a problem with it." How many people would actually care? I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've even been told in my personal life by women that I've met, sometimes in just conversation, and sometimes women I was dating, where your money is the household's money and her money is her money. And somehow that's an acceptable dynamic, even amongst 2 people, as she says, that earn about the same amount, right? So here, I think where I'm going with this piece, you wanted that crown. You want to take it off when things get hard. But that's the difference. When men want to take it off when things get hard, nobody cares. And nobody allows them to. They're expected to carry that responsibility. Not even just because it was initially agreed upon, as far as their original arrangement, but simply because he's a man. And you have women that wanted to really dissolve gender roles in a particular way, and they've been pushing for this for decades. But what I tend to find over and over again is that when we dissolve gender roles, right, it's not necessarily that women want to take as much responsibility as men have traditionally had, especially in regard to finances, but it tends to be more they want to cherry pick the best options from both piles of gender roles while spitting out the pit, so to speak. So there are moments when they want to be traditionally female and have men sacrifice for them, and then when convenient they want to be traditionally male and have their own sacrifices, or at least I don't even want to call it sacrifices. They want to be in a position of authority. But much of this is based on the assumptions around how patriarchy functions. People have assumptions about what it means to be the head of household, right? They have assumptions about it and what it's traditionally meant for men. I think a lot of people, feminists in particular, imagine this boys' club of men in power sitting around smoking cigars and laughing at the women and children that they oppress and dominate and exploit. That's not patriarchy as a formal system, nor is it patriarchy as a gesture or as a practice within a given family, right? That's not necessarily systemic. It's just something within that family. Because in Black America, we don't have a patriarchy of sort. We really don't. We have a gynarchy. And that gynarchy, as the term implies, is led by women. And what my argument is, as far as the Black gynarchy is concerned, is that it's not a matriarchy. It's actually a female patriarchy. And it's backed by policy, decades of it in the Black community, which is what created it. It didn't always exist, but it's been created by policy for the most part. But the difference between a gynarchy and a patriarchy is at least twofold. So on one level, yes, you have the female-led patriarchy, but the other thing is that women have retained the option to pick and choose the best parts of both imagined gender roles. Because Black folk, the gender roles we talk about, these 50s era, notions of patriarchy, Black America's never really had, not to any large extent, and it's never been backed by policy or infrastructure or wealth. None of that. None of it. We've never really had any of that. We've had more of an egalitarian structure for the longest. But that said, what we've had happen is, especially during the 70s, feminists really Black feminists appropriated from white feminists this structure and this issue with their men and applied it in the Black community, right? And from there, they did the same thing white feminists did. They set up a structure where they didn't necessarily opt for male advantages, because if you actually looked at Black male advantages, you'd find that there really aren't any of any serious significance, let alone any that Black men control. So instead of opting for what they thought were Black male privileges, what most feminists did is they opted to be able to cherry pick from both piles. Only the best options of what they imagined gender roles provided, and eliminate the rest. And that's what we have. So in one vein, you want a man to throw his coat down over a puddle so you can walk over it. In another vein, you want him to pay the bills. But when it comes to you and traditional roles in the household, you want to work and be independent. So again, there are really no sacrifices, at least in terms of how these ideas are imagined. They're all about women having complete access to either sets of gender roles when it suits them, and men being subject to the same 50s era sacrifices in effect in order to be considered good men. Whether they got anything out of it was irrelevant. So that's what I got out of this particular piece. That's why I consider it, I think I called it heavy as the patriarchal crown. You wanted that crown, even though Black men never wore it, and now you want to pick and choose what's suitable for you. That's the thing when it comes to patriarchal responsibility. When things get tough, doesn't matter if you like it or not, you're still socially expected to provide. And this is one of the reasons marriage has dropped in the Black community considerably since the 1970s. When Black men lost access to stable employment, They married less because they knew they couldn't maintain those structures, especially when you add in the family court and their willingness to give custody and half of men's income to women upon divorce. A divorce that he could not control and she could initiate whenever she felt like it. Right? Again, providing women options that men don't have. So men began to withdraw from marriage because there was no stability or structure to it, at least in any way that benefited them. While women kept pushing, and then went to the later extent in the 80s to start shaming men who would not set themselves up for this dynamic. And this is where we are. So here you have a woman that actually has a husband that moves in, and he actually operates much like the traditional woman who moves into a man's house. Her income is her income, your income is for the household. But a woman in this position decides she doesn't like it, and she's able to get assistance from the New York Times in shaming her husband. Nobody would shame her if the dynamics were reversed between these two. So I guess all I have to say here is, if this is really what you want, if you really want to wear that crown, you can't complain when it gets heavy, because you wouldn't tolerate a man complaining when it gets heavy. And you don't. So enjoy.